Just a few hours earlier, everything had looked perfect. The camera of the mind rewinds to the soft glow of early evening in the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the streets below buzzed with life. Cars weaving through traffic, street vendors calling out, the distant echo of laughter drifting through the air. High above it all stood their luxury apartment, its glass walls reflecting the fading sunlight like a mirror of success. Inside, everything was immaculate. Polished marble floors, tasteful decor, soft golden lighting that made every corner feel warm, expensive, admired. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, carefully adjusting the pleats of her sari. The fabric shimmered subtly as it caught the light, wrapped around her with quiet elegance. Her movements were precise, practiced, almost as if she had done this 100 times before. If you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. It really supports the channel. From across the room, his voice cut through the silence. "Are you ready yet? We're already running late." She glanced at him through the mirror. He stood near the doorway, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair neatly styled, every detail of his appearance reflecting control and confidence. "I'm almost done," she replied softly. He sighed, slipping his phone into its pocket. "You always take too long. It's just an event, not a wedding." Her hands paused for a brief moment, then continued. "It matters," she said quietly. "People will be there." He let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "People are there for me and not for you." The words hung in the air. Not loud, not aggressive, but sharp enough to leave a mark. She didn't argue. Instead, she turned away from the mirror, picking up her clutch with steady hands. Her expression was calm, composed, the kind of calm that had learned how to survive silence. To anyone watching from the outside, they were the perfect couple. Successful, elegant, admired. At events, they smiled for cameras. They stood side by side. People whispered about their ideal life, their perfect partnership. But perfection can be a very convincing illusion. Comment below, what do you think is really going on in their relationship? Because behind closed doors, the warmth often faded into something colder. Conversations were shorter, his words carried a quiet edge, and her silence grew heavier with time. Still, she never broke that image, not once. As they stepped out of the apartment together, the city lights flickering on around them, he walked ahead with confident strides, while she followed just half a step behind. Not noticeable to others, but enough to say everything. And as their car disappeared into the glowing streets heading toward the grand event, share this story with a friend and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything. No one, not the guests, not the cameras, not even him, had any idea that the illusion they had carefully built was about to crack right there on that stage. Morning light filtered gently through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns across the marble floor. The city outside had already awakened, car horns in the distance, the rhythmic call of a street vendor, the faint hum of life moving forward. Inside the apartment, however, the air felt still. She stood in the kitchen, carefully pouring tea into 2 cups. The aroma of cardamom filled the space, warm and comforting. It was a small ritual she held on to, something steady in a life that often felt unbalanced. He sat at the dining table, eyes fixed on his laptop, fingers tapping rapidly against the keyboard. "I was thinking," she began softly, placing the cup near him, "about tonight's event." He didn't look up. She hesitated for a moment, then continued, "I thought maybe we could arrive a little earlier. It would be nice to meet everyone before the ceremony starts." That's when he finally paused, not to listen, but to sigh. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple as if the conversation itself was exhausting. "You need to worry about that," he said flatly. "These things are handled at my level." Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought," he interrupted, his tone calm but cutting. "You always think too much about things that don't matter." Silence settled between them. The kind that wasn't peaceful, but heavy. She lowered her gaze, nodding finally. "Okay." A few moments passed. He picked up his tea, took a sip, then frowned. "It's too sweet," he muttered, pushing the cup slightly away. "You know I don't like it this way." "I'm sorry, I'll fix it." "Just leave it," he said, already turning back to his laptop. "I don't have time for this." Her hands hovered near the cup, then slowly pulled back. These moments were small, almost invisible. No shouting, no dramatic arguments, just quiet dismissals, subtle corrections. Words pitched ships away little by little. Later that afternoon, as they prepared to leave, she stood near the doorway holding a file in her hand. "I reviewed the proposal you were working on. There's a section that might need revision." He let out a short laugh. "You reviewed it," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Since when did you become an expert?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. "It was just a suggestion," she said quietly. "Then keep it to yourself," he replied, grabbing his keys. "Not everything needs your input." The door clicked shut behind him as he walked out, and she remained there for a moment, standing still, the file clutched in her hands. Her thoughts, her opinions, her voice, slowly fading into the background of his world. But what he failed to notice was that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's where strength begins to grow. And as the evening approached and the grand event drew closer, those quiet cracks were about to become impossible to ignore. Share this story with a friend and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything. No one, not the guest, not the cameras, not even him, had any idea that the illusion they had carefully built was about to crack right there on that stage. The night had fully settled over the city, wrapping it in a glow of neon lights and endless motion. Cars lined the entrance of a grand hotel, their headlights reflecting off polished stone as valets moved swiftly from one arrival to the next. The air carried a mix of excitement and elegance, the kind reserved for nights that mattered. Their car rolled to a smooth stop at the entrance. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then he adjusted his cufflinks, exhaling with quiet confidence before stepping out. Instantly, flashes from cameras lit up the space around him. A few people near the entrance turned, whispering, recognizing him. He thrived in this. Walking around to her side, he opened the door, not out of tenderness, but out of habit, appearance. She stepped out gracefully. Her sari flowed softly as her heels touched the ground, the delicate shimmer of the fabric catching the lights around her. For a second, the noise faded for her. She took in a slow breath, steadying herself. "Stay close," he muttered under his breath, offering a practiced smile to the cameras. "I always do," she replied quietly. They began walking forward together. The red carpet stretched ahead, lined with photographers and guests dressed in their finest. Soft music floated through the entrance hall, blending with laughter and polite greetings. "Good evening," someone called out. He immediately shifted into charm, shaking hands, exchanging confident smiles. "Congratulations in advance," another guest said warmly. "Thank you," he replied smoothly. "It's going to be a great night." Beside him, she smiled politely, nodding when acknowledged, but her hands remained gently clasped in front of her. Her eyes moved across the room, not lost, but observant, aware. A few women complimented her sari. "You look stunning," one of them said. "Thank you," she responded softly, her voice calm, controlled. But beneath that calm, something stirred. Not fear, not exactly, more like awareness, as if she knew this night carried more weight than anyone else realized. They entered the main hall. It was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers above, golden lights illuminating the stage, rows of neatly arranged tables filled with influential guests. A large screen displayed highlights of achievements, names, faces, success stories. He placed a hand lightly behind her back, guiding her toward their table. "Remember," he whispered, his tone low but firm, "just relax and don't overthink anything." She nodded once. "I won't." But her gaze drifted toward the stage, toward the microphone, toward the place where everything would soon unfold. Applause rippled through the grand hall as his name was announced. For a moment, the lights seemed to follow him. He rose from his seat with quiet pride, adjusting his suit as he walked toward the stage. Each step was steady, confident, like a man who believed the world beneath his feet belonged to him. Guests leaned toward another, whispering, some nodding in admiration. At the table, she watched him go. Her hands rested gently in her lap, fingers intertwined, her face calm, but her eyes held a depth that words couldn't quite reach. On stage, he accepted the award with a charming smile, shaking hands with the host as cameras flashed from every angle. "Would you like to say a few words?" the host asked. He chuckled lightly. "Of course." Taking the microphone, he turned toward the audience, scanning the room like a performer ready for his moment. "Thank you. Truly," he began, his voice smooth, practiced. "This recognition means a lot." Polite applause followed. He paused as if reflecting, then his gaze shifted. "And of course," he added, "I wouldn't be standing here without the people in my life." A few heads turned toward her again. She remained still. He smiled, but this time there was something different in it, something sharper. "My wife is here tonight," he said, gesturing openly toward her table. The spotlight found her instantly. For a brief second, she was blinded by the brightness. Then she blinked, forcing a small, composed smile as dozens of eyes fixed on her. "She's been supportive," he continued, drawing out the word just enough to feel strange, in her own way. A few light cuckles echoed. He leaned slightly closer to the mic, lowering his voice just enough to sound casual. "I mean, let's be honest, she's not exactly the brains behind any of this." The laughter this time was louder, but uneven. Some joined in, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. At her table, the sound hit like a wave. Her smile froze. Not gone, just held in place. On stage, he continued, clearly feeding off the reaction. "She's great at organizing dinners, though," he added with a smirk, "and making sure I don't forget where I left my keys." More laughter, but now it was different, forced, awkward. A few people exchanged glances. Someone near the front lowered their gaze. The energy in the room had shifted. What was meant to entertain began to sting. Still, he didn't stop. "Every successful man needs someone behind him," he said lightly, "and she's very good at staying there." This time, the laughter barely came. Silence crept in around the edges of the room, and all eyes returned to her. She sat there under the weight of 100 silent judgments, but she didn't break. No tears, no reaction, no visible anger. Just stillness, a quiet, controlled stillness that didn't match the moment. And in that silence, something began to change, because while he stood there believing he had the power, he had no idea that the very next moment would take everything away from him. The silence that followed his last remark didn't break all at once. It lingered. Heavy, uncomfortable. All eyes were still on her. For a moment, she remained seated, her posture straight, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The soft glow of the spotlight still brushed against her face, highlighting every detail, her calm expression, her steady breathing, the quiet strength in her eyes. Anyone watching closely would have expected something. Tears, anger, embarrassment, a reaction, but it never came. Instead, she slowly inhaled, deep and controlled, as if grounding herself in that single breath. Then, without a word, she rose. The faint rustle of her sari broke through the silence as she stood, the delicate fabric falling perfectly into place. Her movements were unhurried, graceful, almost as if this moment had already been rehearsed in her mind long before it arrived. A few heads turned. Someone whispered, "Is she leaving?" She didn't look at the stage, didn't look at him. She simply adjusted her clutch in her hand and took her first step forward. Each step echoed softly against the polished floor as she began to walk through the rows of tables. The path ahead of her seemed to open on its own, guests instinctively shifting their chairs, creating space, watching her pass. There was no rush in her stride, no visible pain, only composure. Only control, and something else, something harder to define, power. Near the exit, a staff member hesitated before opening the large glass doors for her. Cool night air slipped inside as she stepped out of the hall. The noise behind her, applause, murmurs, the distant voice on the microphone faded instantly. Outside, the city was alive. Streetlights glowed along the road, cars passed in steady motion, and somewhere in the distance, a vendor's voice carried through the night. It was a world untouched by what had just happened inside. She paused at the top of the steps. For the first time, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not in weakness, but in release. A single breath escaped her lips, slow, steady, final. When she opened her eyes again, something had shifted. The softness remained, but beneath it was certainty. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up instantly, revealing a message waiting for her. Her gaze settled on it, and for the briefest moment, a faint smile touched her lips. Not of happiness, but of knowing. Because while everyone inside believed she had just walked away in silence, they didn't realize she wasn't walking away from anything. She was walking towards something, and inside that hall, in just a matter of moments, everything was about to change. The hall was still buzzing with uneasy murmurs after she walked out. People exchanged quiet looks, unsure whether to applaud, to laugh, or simply to move on. The atmosphere has shifted from celebration to discomfort, like a melody that suddenly fell out of tune. On stage, the host hesitated for a brief moment, glancing toward the wings as if receiving a signal. Then, adjusting the microphone, he stepped forward with a smile that felt slightly different now, more formal, more serious. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing clearly through the hall. The crowd slowly quieted. He paused, letting the silence settle in. "We now have a very important announcement to make." A few people leaned forward. Others exchanged curious glances. Even the husband, still on stage, frowned slightly. Something about the tone felt off. The host continued, "Tonight, we are not only celebrating achievements, but also welcoming a new leader into one of the most influential positions in this industry." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. The screen behind him flickered, then went dark. A second later, it lit up again, and there she was. Her name, her image, displayed boldly across the screen. The room froze. For the first time, the host announced, his voice steady, "We are proud to introduce the new CEO and majority owner of this organization." A pause. A heartbeat. Every eye locked onto the stage. "Our Miss Amina." The word echoed through the hall like a shockwave. For a second, no one reacted. Then came the murmurs. "What? Is that her? No, this can't be." On stage, the husband's expressions shifted instantly. Confusion, disbelief, then something else. His confidence faltered slightly. He turned his head slowly toward the screen, then toward the entrance, toward where she had walked out. The host gestured toward the doors. "Please join us on stage." And at that exact moment, the large glass doors at the back of the hall opened. A soft gust of cool air drifted inside, and she stepped in, the same woman who had just walked out in silence. But now, everything about her felt different. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, didn't look at the crowd. Her steps were calm, deliberate, each one echoing with quiet authority as she walked down the center aisle. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Phones began to writhe again, but this time not for applause, for proof. As she moved forward, heads turned instinctively as if something undeniable was pulling all attention toward her. And on stage, he stood frozen, watching her approach, realization slowly creeping into his expression, because the woman he had just humiliated was not just his wife. She was about to become the most powerful person in the room, and everything he thought he controlled was about to slip completely out of his hands. The applause that followed her announcement felt distant, almost unreal. On the stage, he stood frozen, his fingers still lightly gripping the microphone. The world around him continued to move, whispers rising, cameras clicking, eyes shifting. But for him, everything had narrowed down to one thing: her. As she walked closer, her presence seemed to grow stronger with every step. No rush, no hesitation, just calm, steady certainty. And for the first time that night, his confidence began to crack. "What?" he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible even to himself. His mind raced, trying to process what the host had just said. CEO. Owner. Her. He swallowed hard. No, that couldn't be right. This was his company, his achievements, his life. But then, his eyes shifted to the screen behind him again. Her name, clearly displayed, official, confirmed, undeniable. His grip on the microphone tightened. "No," he whispered, almost in disbelief. This has to be a mistake." The audience could sense the change. The confident man who'd stood there just moments ago was gone, and in his place, uncertainty. She reached the front of the stage. Finally, she looked up. Their eyes met. For a split second, neither spoke. No anger in her expression, no revenge, just quiet authority. "Did you enjoy your speech?" she asked softly. Her voice was calm, controlled, but it carried weight. He blinked, taken aback. "This isn't funny." She tilted her head slightly. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The question landed like a quiet oodar. His breath hitched. He hesitated, then stepped forward slightly. "You didn't tell me anything about this." She held his gaze. "I didn't have to." His jaw tightened. "This is my company," he said, forcing confidence into his tone. "I built it." A faint, almost unreadable smile touched her lips. "You built part of it." His chest tightened. She continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "The rest?" She took a small step closer. "I built." Silence. The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. Behind them, the audience remained completely silent now, watching, absorbing, realizing. He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing growing uneven. "No," he shook his head. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding. We can fix this. Just tell me what's going on." For the first time that night, his voice carried panic, not control, not dominance, but desperation. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she simply looked at him, calm, measured, powerful. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but final. "There's nothing to fix." A pause. His heart pounded. And in that moment, everything he had ever believed about his control started slipping through his fingers. And he realized this wasn't just a shift in power. It was the beginning of his downfall. The noise of the hall faded behind a closed door. Inside the quiet room, the air felt heavy, charged with everything that had just unfolded. Soft golden lights illuminated the space, but they couldn't soften the tension that now lived between them. He stood near the center, hands slightly raised, as if searching for the right words, the right way to undo what had already been done. She remained by the window, calm, still. Her gaze rested on the city below, lights flickering in the distance, cars moving like silent witnesses to everything that had passed. "I didn't know," he finally said, his voice lower now, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. "If I had known, I would never have said those things." Silence. He took a step closer. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I got carried away. You know how these events make me—" She turned, not abruptly, not angrily, just enough to meet his eyes. And the moment she did, he stopped speaking, because there was something different in her expression now. Not the quiet endurance he was used to, not the silence he mistaken for weakness. This was clarity. "You always thought that I stayed quiet because I had nothing to say." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She took a slow step toward him. "I listened when you dismissed me." Another step. "I stayed silent when you ignored me." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. "And I smiled when you made me feel small, because I believed things would change." He looked down, his hands tightening at his sides. But they didn't. She continued. A pause. A breath. And somewhere along the way, her gaze didn't waver. I stopped waiting. The room felt smaller. He shook his head slightly. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know," she replied. The honesty in her voice made it harder to hold on to excuses. "But intent," she added gently, "doesn't erase impact." That line lingered between them, heavy, unavoidable. She folded her hands in front of her, her posture still composed, still dignified. "I didn't take this position to punish you. I earned it because I needed to stand on my own." His voice softened. "You didn't have to do this alone." She looked at him then, truly looked. "I did," she said quietly. A long silence followed. Not tense, not angry, just final. He stepped closer, his voice breaking slightly. "Is there anything I can do now?" She held his gaze for a moment longer, then spoke, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything she had endured. "Start by understanding that respect is earned, not something you demand." A pause. "It's something you give, or lose." His eyes lowered. For the first time, he had no reply. Outside, the night continued as if nothing had changed. But inside that room, everything had. And as she turned back toward the window, it was clear. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a turning point. And whatever came next would define both of their futures. Morning light slowly spread across the city, touching rooftops, windows, and quiet streets with a soft golden glow. Life outside continued as it always had. Vendors calling out, children laughing in the distance, the rhythm of a new day beginning without pause. But inside the office tower, everything felt different. She stood near the large glass window of her office, overlooking the city below. The same city that had once felt overwhelming now seemed small beneath her gaze. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, composed, confident, changed. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said calmly. The door opened. It was him. He stepped inside slowly, his presence no longer carrying the same weight it once did. His shoulders were slightly lowered, his expression quieter, humbled. "I just wanted to see you," he said. She turned toward him, not rushed, not guarded, just present. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It was different. "I've been thinking a lot," he finally said, his voice softer now, "about everything I said, everything I did." She listened quietly. "I realize now how wrong I was." A faint breeze moved through the open window, carrying the sounds of the city below into the room. She walked slowly toward her desk, placing a few papers in order before speaking. "You didn't just hurt me," she said gently. "You dismissed me." He nodded slightly, unable to argue. "I gave you chances, quietly, patiently." Her tone wasn't sharp, it was reflective. "And when those chances were ignored," she paused, "I chose myself." That line hung in the air. Simple, powerful. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, because I'm not the same person anymore. He looked at her, something shifting in his expression, regret mixed with understanding. "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't deserve that." She studied him for a moment, not with anger, but with clarity. "You don't need to punish yourself, just learn." A long silence followed. Then she picked up a file from her desk, reviewing it briefly before placing it aside. Her work, her future, her life, built on her own terms now. He stood there for a moment longer, as if trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Then slowly, he nodded. "I understand," he said. And for the first time, he truly meant it. She gave a small, almost gentle nod in return. Not cold, not cruel, just final. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, but she didn't stop him. She simply watched. And when the door finally closed behind him, she turned back toward the window. The city stretched endlessly before her, full of possibilities, full of new beginnings. She took a slow breath, steady, peaceful, and smiled faintly, because while one chapter had ended, another, stronger, quieter, and entirely her own, had just begun.